Lily sat in her small, dimly lit apartment, clutching her violin as memories flooded back. Her fingers traced the worn-out strings while tears brimmed in her eyes. It had been over a decade, but the emotion still felt raw. She remembered that summer vividly, a whirlwind of love, laughter, and stolen moments by the lake. Ethan, with his tousled brown hair and bright eyes, was the embodiment of youthful dreams and endless possibilities. He had promised her everything, promises he never kept. Back then, Lily was a passionate, naive teenager, intoxicated by the thrill of first love. Ethan had ambitions that matched her own. He wanted to change the world, and she believed he could. They often spoke of running away, exploring new places, and never being apart. But then, one day, he vanished without a word. No note, no goodbye, just silence. Why, Ethan? Why did you leave? Lily whispered to herself, her voice breaking. She had asked that question countless times, yet the answer never came. She had searched for him for months, fighting against disbelief and the crushing weight of abandonment. His disappearance marked her deeply, leaving her with scars she never showed to anyone. Now, Lily was no longer the hopeful girl who once believed love could conquer all. She was a struggling violinist in New York City, trying to make ends meet while playing at small events and street performances. Every so often, she would find herself staring at her reflection, wondering if Ethan would recognize the woman she had become. As she set her violin down, a notification buzzed on her phone. It was an email from her manager, Andrea, marked urgent. "Dear Lily, you've been invited to perform at the exclusive St. James Gala next week. It's a prestigious event, and the pay is substantial. Let me know if you're interested, though I understand it's a short notice." Andrea. Lily's heart skipped a beat. The St. James Gala was known for its elite guest list and lavish celebrations, a world far removed from hers. The paycheck mentioned was tempting, more than enough to cover her overdue rent and bills. But the idea of stepping into that world made her uneasy. She knew it was filled with powerful people, people who could make or break careers with a mere gesture. Could she face such a crowd? But as the day wore on, reality settled in. Lily needed the money, and this opportunity might not come again. Steeling herself, she replied to Andrea, "I'll do it. Thank you." Little did Lily know, this decision would set her on a path she never expected. A path that would bring Ethan back into her life, but in a way she could never have imagined. Ethan, the boy who once loved her under the summer sun, was now a man lost to time. Would they find answers to the questions left unanswered? Or would this reunion only deepen the wounds? That night, Lily lay awake, the echoes of her violin filling the silence of her room. The air was thick with anticipation, but it was tainted by an undercurrent of fear. Deep down, she sensed that the gala was more than just a performance. It was the beginning of something inevitable, something that would force her to confront the past she had tried so hard to bury. The grand ballroom of the St. James Hotel glowed with an opulence that Lily had never experienced before. Crystal chandeliers hung like glistening stars above a sea of elegantly dressed guests, each one seemingly absorbed in a dance of power and influence. It was a world of polished smiles, whispered alliances, and laughter that never reached the eyes. Lily felt like an intruder, her modest black dress blending into the shadows of the lavish event. As she adjusted the violin beneath her chin, her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her gaze steady. This was not the first time she had performed for a wealthy crowd, but tonight felt different, tenser, heavier. It was as if the air itself was filled with secrets. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The notes emerged slowly at first, then gained confidence, filling the room with a haunting melody. Her bow danced across the strings with a precision that only years of practice could achieve. For a moment, the crowd seemed captivated by her music, their conversations reduced to murmurs. Lily's eyes remained shut, letting the music guide her through the familiar but painful landscapes of her memories. Suddenly, she felt a presence, an unshakable feeling of being watched. It wasn't the curious glances of the audience. This was different, more intense. She opened her eyes, her gaze sweeping across the room, and that's when she saw him. Ethan. He stood near the back of the ballroom, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that emphasized the transformation from the boy she had known to the powerful man he had become. His eyes, however, were still the same, dark, piercing, and filled with an intensity that hadn't faded over the years. A cold shiver ran down Lily's spine as their eyes locked. She missed a note, a jarring error that was almost unthinkable for her. Focus, she mentally commanded herself, but the damage was done. She could feel the weight of Ethan's gaze, heavy and unyielding. He seemed both familiar and alien, a ghost from the past that had somehow become flesh and blood again. She managed to finish the piece, but her heart was racing, her mind spinning with disbelief and confusion. What was he doing here? Was this some cruel twist of fate, or had he orchestrated it all? Lily hurried off the stage, her breathing unsteady. She needed a moment to collect herself, to understand what was happening. She found a quiet corner behind the stage, away from the prying eyes of the guests. But before she could gather her thoughts, a voice, deep and commanding, called out from behind her. "Lily." She froze, her back still turned. It had been so long since she'd heard that voice, but it was unmistakable. Slowly, she turned around to face him. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He stepped closer, a faint smile playing on his lips, but his eyes remained distant. "It's been a while." Lily's mind raced with 1,000 questions, but only one managed to escape her lips. "Why are you here?" His expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something, regret, perhaps, passing through his eyes. "This is my event. I own the St. James." The words hit Lily like a punch. The boy she had loved, the one who had vanished without a trace, was now the powerful man behind this entire spectacle. It made no sense. How had he risen to such heights, and why had he stayed away for so long? Ethan seemed to read the confusion in her eyes. "I never thought I'd see you again," he admitted, his voice low but steady. "Neither did I," Lily replied, trying to maintain her composure. "But you disappeared, Ethan. You left without a word." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, he seemed to struggle with his response. "I know," he said finally. "There's a lot you don't understand." Lily's eyes flashed with anger. "I don't need your excuses. I needed answers back then, and you weren't there." Ethan looked away, a shadow crossing his face. "You're right, but there are things I couldn't control, things you couldn't have known." She felt a surge of frustration and pain. "And what makes you think I want to know now? After all this time?" He paused, his gaze softening. "Because I owe you the truth, Lily. It's the least I can do." But Lily wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. The years of unanswered questions and unhealed wounds were too fresh, too raw. She took a step back, creating a physical distance between them. "You can't just come back and expect everything to be okay," she said, her voice firm but tinged with hurt. Ethan nodded, a resigned look in his eyes. "I know, but I'll be here if you want to talk." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Lily alone in the dimly lit hallway. She stood there, her heart heavy with unresolved emotions. She had longed for this moment, imagined it 1,000 times. But now that it was real, she felt more lost than ever. The night was far from over, but Lily knew one thing for certain. Ethan's reappearance was not just a chance encounter. There were deeper forces at play, and she was about to be drawn back into a story she thought had ended long ago. The crowd's energy swelled as the night continued, with laughter, clinking glasses, and an orchestra that played with unyielding precision. Yet, for Lily, everything felt out of sync. Her encounter with Ethan had shaken her deeply, leaving behind a mixture of anger, confusion, and a hint of a feeling she wasn't ready to name. She had hoped to avoid him for the rest of the evening, but the sense of his presence lingered. As she stepped back onto the stage for her second performance, she took a steadying breath, gripping the violin a little tighter than usual. This time, however, she noticed something peculiar. A man in a suit approached her with a written note. He handed it to her with a respectful nod before quickly disappearing into the crowd. Lily frowned and unfolded the paper. The message was simple yet unsettling. "Play the song I taught you. You know which one." Her heart skipped a beat. Only one song matched that description, a melody Ethan had created during one of their afternoons by the lake, a hauntingly beautiful piece that became their secret lullaby. She had never performed it in public. It was too personal, too tied to a painful past. Lily's instincts screamed to refuse, but the unspoken demand felt impossible to ignore. How could he be so audacious? To force her into playing that particular piece in front of all these people? The audacity infuriated her. But another feeling bubbled up inside. Curiosity, maybe even defiance. In the crowd, Ethan stood by the large bay window, seemingly unbothered by the opulent festivities around him. His eyes remained fixed on the stage, waiting. It was a silent standoff, one she wasn't willing to lose. Lily raised the violin to her chin, her fingers trembling for the first time in years. She let out a long, shaky breath and began to play. The melody started slowly, each note dripping with the bittersweet essence of nostalgia. It was haunting, beautiful, and laced with the memories she had fought so hard to forget. The crowd hushed, as if sensing the intensity of the moment. Ethan's gaze never wavered, and as Lily's fingers moved across the strings, a flood of memories returned. She remembered the warmth of Ethan's touch as he guided her hand over the violin strings, the way he would hum softly to help her learn each part. The song held the innocence of their first kiss, the joy of whispered secrets, and the ache of a promise that had never been kept. By the time Lily reached the final note, tears blurred her vision, but she refused to let them fall. The audience burst into applause, oblivious to the emotional battle she had just endured. She bowed mechanically, then retreated off stage, her chest tightening as if the air had suddenly become too thin. Behind the stage, Lily paced back and forth, trying to steady herself. The performance had drained her, but more than that, it had reopened a wound she hadn't expected to confront so soon. Her head was spinning when a familiar figure stepped into the shadows behind her. Lily, Ethan's voice was softer now, less guarded than before. She spun around, her eyes blazing with a mix of anger and disbelief. "How dare you?" she demanded, her voice low but seething. "That song was ours, not a spectacle for your rich friends." Ethan's expression shifted, a mix of guilt and something else, perhaps longing. "I needed to hear it again," he admitted, his voice raw. "It was the only way I could say what I need to say." Lily scoffed, shaking her head. "You've had over 10 years to explain, Ethan. You chose to disappear instead." His shoulders sagged slightly. "It wasn't by choice," he replied. "You don't understand what really happened." Her eyes were filled with a mix of pain and frustration. "Then tell me, Ethan, tell me why you left." He hesitated, and for a moment, she thought he might walk away again. But instead, he stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking. "My family," he said finally. "They made me choose between you and everything else I had worked for." Lily felt a bitter laugh escape her lips. "So you chose them. You chose power, money, and all of this." She gestured toward the opulent ballroom. "Over us." Ethan's gaze was steady, yet filled with regret. "I didn't choose. I was forced. There were things you never knew, things I never wanted you to know. To protect you." "Protect me?" Lily repeated incredulously. "You think disappearing without a word was protection?" His voice broke slightly. "I know it doesn't make sense, but I was young, naive. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I could come back once everything was settled." Lily's eyes were cold, her voice sharp. "But you never came back, Ethan. And now you're here, forcing me to relive it all, as if you can just pick up where we left off." Ethan reached out, but Lily recoiled, the pain too fresh to allow any contact. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. "I just want you to understand that it wasn't as simple as it seemed." She looked away, her heart torn between the love that had never fully died and the anger that had grown in its place. "Understanding doesn't change anything, Ethan. It doesn't undo the years I spent wondering if I'd ever meant anything to you." "You meant everything," he whispered, the vulnerability in his voice catching her off guard. "You still do." But Lily wasn't ready for redemption. Not yet. She shook her head, tears brimming once again. "I can't do this, Ethan. Not tonight." She turned away, her back stiff with unresolved emotions. As she walked toward the exit, Ethan's voice called after her one last time. "Lily, please. Give me a chance to make things right." She paused, but only for a second. Without looking back, she continued walking, her mind a storm of memories, regrets, and the haunting melody that had once been theirs. The next morning, the harsh reality of New York City greeted Lily with the cold light of dawn. She sat at her small kitchen table, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee as the events of the previous night replayed in her mind. Ethan's reappearance, the unexpected confrontation, and the overwhelming emotion of playing their song. It all felt surreal, like an echo from a past life colliding violently with her present. But there was no time for reflection. Her phone buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. It was Andrea, her manager, sounding more excited than usual. "Lily, the gala performance was a hit. People loved it, especially that last piece," she said quickly, not waiting for a response. "There's already another offer on the table, another high-profile event. Better pay?" Lily sighed, rubbing her temple. "I don't know, Andrea. Last night was harder than I expected." Andrea's voice softened, sensing the hesitation. "I understand, but think about it, Lily. These events could really boost your career. It's not every day you get these kinds of chances." Lily knew Andrea was right. Financially, she couldn't afford to be too selective. But the thought of stepping into another event like that, potentially seeing Ethan again, filled her with a mix of dread and anger. "I'll think about it," she finally said. "Good. But don't take too long," Andrea replied before hanging up. Lily set the phone down, feeling the weight of the decision pressing against her chest. She couldn't escape the feeling that Ethan's sudden presence in her life was far from over, that this was only the beginning. A part of her wanted to run, to shield herself from the storm she felt brewing. But another part, one that had never truly healed, was drawn to the mystery surrounding Ethan's disappearance. Later that afternoon, as Lily practiced in her cramped living room, she couldn't shake the image of Ethan's face. His pained expression, the regret in his eyes, and the way he had seemed almost desperate for her to understand. She hated the effect he still had on her, the way he could stir up emotions she had buried deep within. Then, the doorbell rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. Lily's heart raced for a moment, irrationally expecting it to be Ethan. But when she opened the door, it was only a delivery man holding a small package. "Are you Lily Ward?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, confused. "Sign here, please." She did as instructed, and the man handed over a plain, unmarked box. Lily stared at it for a moment before carefully opening it. Inside, she found a simple, handwritten note. Asterisk for old time's sake. Asterisk. Beneath the note was a small music box, one she instantly recognized. It was the very same one Ethan had given her during their last summer together. She had thought it lost, just like everything else they had shared. With trembling hands, she wound the music box, and the familiar tune began to play, a delicate version of their song. The haunting melody filled the room, and Lily felt tears welling up once again. Ethan was clearly trying to reach her, but why now? Why after so many years of silence? She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his sudden reappearance, something darker hidden beneath his attempt at reconciliation. She slammed the music box shut, unable to bear the memories it evoked. The past had to stay buried, she told herself firmly. She couldn't allow Ethan to disrupt her life again, not after the devastation he had left behind. But the next day, as Lily prepared for a street performance near Central Park, her resolve was tested once more. She had just started to play when she noticed a figure standing at a distance, watching intently. Her fingers hesitated for a fraction of a second, and she almost stopped playing altogether. It was Ethan, dressed more casually than the night before. He stood among the scattered crowd, his expression unreadable. Lily's heart tightened, but she forced herself to continue the performance. She wasn't about to let him disrupt her music again. But even as the notes flowed, she couldn't ignore his presence. He was like a specter, a constant reminder of the unresolved pain between them. When the performance ended, the crowd dispersed, leaving only a few curious onlookers. Ethan remained where he was, waiting patiently. Lily knew she couldn't avoid him forever, so she reluctantly approached. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He looked at her with an intensity that was both familiar and unnerving. "I just want to talk, Lily. To explain everything." She crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "You had years to do that. Why now?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Because I finally broke free from them, from my family's control. I couldn't reach out before. They wouldn't let me." Lily narrowed her eyes, skepticism clear on her face. "That's a convenient excuse. You expect me to believe you were trapped this whole time?" "I know how it sounds," Ethan admitted, his voice low and earnest. "But it's the truth. They manipulated everything, including you." Lily's expression softened slightly, but she remained guarded. "And what exactly do you mean by that?" "They threatened you, Lily," Ethan said quietly. "They knew how much you meant to me, and they used that against me. I had to leave to keep you safe." His words hit her like a punch, the implications sinking in slowly. Could it be true? Had his disappearance really been about protecting her? It was a lot to process, and she wasn't sure if she could trust him. "You think you can just walk back into my life and tell me this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Do you have any idea how much you hurt me?" "I know," Ethan whispered, his eyes filled with genuine remorse. "And I don't expect forgiveness. But I had to try, Lily. I had to tell you the truth, even if it's too late." Lily's anger melted into something softer. Confusion, vulnerability, a flicker of hope she tried desperately to extinguish. She turned away, blinking back tears. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Ethan," she said, her voice barely audible. He stepped closer, his voice thick with emotion. "Just give me a chance to prove that I've changed. I'm not the same person who left you, I swear." But Lily couldn't bring herself to look at him. "I need time," she finally managed to say. "I need time to figure this out." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here." As Lily walked away, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The revelation of Ethan's reasons for leaving had shaken her, but it didn't erase the years of pain and abandonment. She wasn't ready to trust him, not yet, but deep down, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder if this could be the beginning of something new, or at least, a chance to finally close the chapter that had haunted her for so long. The evening air was thick with tension as Lily paced back and forth in her small apartment. Ethan's confession from earlier in the day had shattered the fragile wall she built to keep him out. It wasn't just the revelation that he'd left to protect her. It was the undeniable sincerity in his eyes that haunted her. She couldn't deny the tiny seed of doubt that had taken root. What if he really had been forced to leave? What if everything she thought she knew was a lie? Lost in thought, she barely noticed the knock at her door. It was unexpected, loud, and urgent. Lily's heart jumped. No one visited her this late. With a mix of fear and curiosity, she approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. Ethan stood on the other side, looking agitated. Lily hesitated before opening the door. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" she asked, trying to mask her unease. "I know it's late," he said quickly, "but I couldn't leave things like that. I needed to make sure you understand everything, and there's something more you need to know." Her patience was wearing thin. "Why should I listen to more of your explanations? You've already turned my life upside down." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Please, just hear me out. This might be the last chance I get to explain." There was something in his voice that caught her off guard, an urgency that seemed genuine. Reluctantly, Lily stepped aside to let him in. Ethan entered, his presence filling the small living room with an awkward silence. He stood there, unsure of where to begin. "Do you want some coffee?" she offered, more out of habit than actual hospitality. He shook his head. "No, thank you. I won't stay long." Lily crossed her arms and leaned against the wall. "All right, then talk." Ethan took a deep breath. "My family, the Martins, they're not just wealthy. There's a darker side to their power. They control people, manipulate situations, and destroy anything that threatens them. When we were together, they saw you as a distraction, a weakness they couldn't allow me to have." Lily's eyes narrowed. "So, what? They threatened me, and you just left?" "It wasn't that simple," he said, his voice tight. "They made me an ultimatum. Leave you and inherit everything, or stay with you and lose it all, including my safety and potentially yours." She struggled to process his words, but part of her still refused to fully believe. "And you really expect me to believe they would harm me?" Ethan nodded solemnly. "I didn't want to believe it either, but they were serious, Lily. They used their connections to intimidate people, ruin lives. I couldn't risk it." Lily's anger simmered beneath the surface. "So, you abandoned me for money and power. That's the truth, isn't it?" His face contorted with pain. "It wasn't just about the money. I was trapped. I was too young, too scared, and too stupid to fight them back then. But now, I'm not afraid anymore." His vulnerability was disarming, but Lily refused to let her guard down. "Why now, Ethan? Why come back after all these years?" "Because I finally have control of my life," he answered quietly. "My father passed away last year, and I was able to dismantle the chains they had on me. I wanted to find you, to tell you everything. But more than that, I wanted to see if there was still something left between us." Lily's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "You think you can just walk back into my life and expect me to trust you?" "No," he admitted. "I know trust isn't something I can earn overnight, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I've changed." The sincerity in his voice stirred something within Lily, a feeling she wasn't ready to confront. "You can't just erase the past, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You left me alone to pick up the pieces of a broken dream." "I know," he said, his voice filled with regret, "and I hate myself for it. But I'm here now, and I want to be honest with you." Lily turned away, struggling to keep her composure. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly, almost to herself. Ethan took a step closer, but he kept a respectful distance. "You don't have to decide now. Just know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere this time." As the silence settled between them, Lily felt a mix of anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope she couldn't ignore. She knew that forgiving Ethan wouldn't be easy, but the possibility of finally getting answers was too strong to resist. Suddenly, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. He quickly silenced the call, but the look of concern didn't leave his face. "What's wrong?" Lily asked, sensing a shift in his demeanor. "It's complicated," Ethan replied, his voice tense. "There are still people in my family who don't want me reconnecting with you. They're trying to keep us apart." Lily's confusion turned to alarm. "You mean they're still watching you? Watching us?" He nodded grimly. "I didn't want to drag you into this again, but it's happening, and I don't know how far they're willing to go." Fear gripped Lily, but it was mixed with a strange sense of determination. "So, what do we do now?" Ethan's eyes met hers, filled with resolve. "We stand together this time. I'm done running, and I won't let them control me anymore. But I need you to be careful, Lily. If anything feels off, call me." She nodded slowly, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The situation was quickly becoming more complicated than she had imagined. What had started as a personal quest for closure was rapidly turning into something much darker. But as Ethan left her apartment that night, one thing was clear. The past wasn't finished with them, and neither were the secrets that still lingered in the shadows. The following days were a blur of confusion and uncertainty for Lily. Every corner she turned, every street she crossed, seemed haunted by the possibility of eyes watching her. Ethan's warning lingered in her mind like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over everything. She tried to keep her routine normal: street performances, rehearsals, and brief, forced interactions with Andrea. But even the familiar notes of her violin sounded different, as if tainted by a hidden danger. One evening, after a long day of playing near the park, Lily was packing her violin when she noticed a man lingering nearby. He wasn't part of the usual crowd of spectators. His gaze was too intent, his posture too rigid. She felt a chill run down her spine, but tried to dismiss it as paranoia. After all, New York was full of strange encounters. As she began to walk home, she sensed someone following her. The rhythm of footsteps behind her matched hers, then slowed whenever she did. Her heart raced, and she quickly ducked into a small coffee shop, hoping to lose whoever it was. She pretended to browse the menu while glancing over her shoulder. The man stood outside, his eyes scanning the street. She took out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed Ethan's number. It rang twice before he answered, his voice low but alert. "Lily? Ethan, someone's following me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, then Ethan's tone sharpened. "Where are you?" "A coffee shop on 3rd and Madison," she replied quickly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Stay there." "I'm coming," he said firmly before hanging up. Lily's heart was pounding. She found a seat in the back corner of the shop, trying to blend into the crowd. Her eyes darted to the entrance, where the man had stopped, now talking into his phone. Panic surged through her veins, but she forced herself to remain calm. Moments later, Ethan burst through the door, his face tense and focused. He spotted her immediately and crossed the room in quick strides. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face for signs of distress. Lily nodded, though she was far from okay. "He's right outside," she said quietly. Ethan glanced out the window, his jaw tightening when he saw the man still lingering near the entrance. "We need to leave. Now." Without waiting for her response, he took her hand and led her out through a side exit, away from the man's line of sight. They moved quickly down the alley, emerging onto a quieter street. "Ethan, what's going on?" Lily demanded as they continued to walk, her voice tinged with frustration and fear. "You said they were dangerous, but I didn't think it would come to this." He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "I didn't want to scare you, but I had to warn you. They're more ruthless than you can imagine, Lily. And now that I've reconnected with you, they see you as leverage." Her eyes widened. "Leverage? For what?" "To control me," he said bitterly. "They think if they can keep you under threat, they can force me back into line." Lily felt a mix of fear and anger rise within her. "I never asked for this, Ethan. I never wanted to be dragged into your family's mess." He reached out, his expression pained. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I swear, I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Lily pulled her hand away, her emotions a storm of confusion and resentment. "But what if you can't, Ethan? What if this never ends?" He looked down, his voice barely audible. "I don't know, but I can't lose you again." The raw vulnerability in his voice struck a chord in Lily's heart, but she couldn't afford to let her guard down. "You already lost me once, Ethan, and it nearly destroyed me." Ethan's eyes were filled with regret. "I know, but this time, I'm fighting back." For a moment, they stood there in the dimly lit street, the weight of the past pressing heavily between them. Ethan finally broke the silence. "Come with me," he said quietly. "It's not safe for you to be alone right now." Lily hesitated, torn between fear and the instinct to protect herself. But the truth was, she didn't feel safe, neither with Ethan nor without him. She nodded slowly, unsure of what else to do. Ethan led her to his car parked a few blocks away, a sleek black sedan that spoke volumes about the life he'd built in her absence. They drove in silence, the tension thick in the confined space. After a short drive, they arrived at an upscale apartment building. Ethan parked and turned to face Lily. "You can stay here for as long as you need," he said. "I have security here. You'll be safe." Lily's exhaustion was catching up with her, the adrenaline giving way to a bone-deep fatigue. "Fine," she said, too tired to argue. They entered the building, and Ethan led her to a spacious, tastefully decorated apartment. It was a stark contrast to Lily's cramped space, filled with reminders of a simpler, more carefree past. She felt out of place, unsure whether she was stepping into a sanctuary or a trap. Ethan noticed her unease. "You don't have to trust me, Lily," he said quietly, "but at least trust that I want to protect you." His words hung in the air, filled with a desperate sincerity that was hard to ignore. "I just want to know the truth, Ethan," she said finally. "No more half-truths, no more secrets." Ethan nodded slowly. "You'll get it, Lily. All of it." But as the night wore on and Lily tried to settle into the unfamiliar surroundings, sleep eluded her. The knowledge that Ethan's family was still a threat, still lurking in the shadows, gnawed at her. It wasn't just about trust anymore. It was about survival. In the dim light of the guest room, Lily reached for her violin, her fingers finding the strings almost instinctively. She played softly, the haunting melody of their song filling the silence. It was a reminder of everything she had lost, and everything she still couldn't understand. And as the final notes faded, Lily realized that the conflict she faced was no longer just with Ethan or his family. It was also within herself. Would she let the past define her, or was there still a chance to reclaim her own story? Morning light filtered through the curtains of Ethan's apartment, casting soft shadows across the room. Lily stirred awake, her body tense from the events of the previous day. For a brief, disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came back: the man who had followed her, Ethan's rushed arrival, and the stark reality of being entangled in his family's dangerous web. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes as she tried to gather her thoughts. Ethan had already left a note on the kitchen counter. "I'll be back later. I have some things to handle regarding your safety. Stay inside and don't open the door for anyone." The message was short and to the point, but it carried an underlying sense of urgency. Lily's first instinct was to leave, to regain control of her own life. But deep down, she knew she couldn't outrun the situation, at least not without answers. She looked around the immaculate apartment, feeling a mix of gratitude and discomfort. Ethan was trying, that much was clear. But was it too little, too late? Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Andrea, her manager, with another gig offer. Lily hesitated before answering. "Lily, you've got an offer for a private performance next week. High pay, good exposure," Andrea said enthusiastically. "What do you think?" Lily sighed. "I don't know, Andrea. Things are a bit complicated right now." Andrea's voice softened. "I know you're going through a lot, but these opportunities could really help you. Just think about it, okay?" "I will," Lily promised, then ended the call. As the day dragged on, Lily found herself restless, pacing the living room. She picked up her violin, hoping that music might provide some solace. The familiar notes filled the apartment, each sound echoing off the pristine walls. But even the comfort of music felt tainted now, overshadowed by the chaos Ethan had brought back into her life. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the door. Lily's heart leaped into her throat. She approached cautiously, her mind racing with possibilities. "Who is it?" she called out, keeping her voice steady. "It's Ethan," came the reply. Lily opened the door to find him standing there, looking slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't slept. His eyes were tired but determined. "Sorry I'm late," he said, stepping inside quickly. "There were complications." Lily studied his face, searching for answers. "What kind of complications?" Ethan hesitated before speaking. "They know where you are. I had hoped to keep this place off their radar, but it seems they have more resources than I anticipated." Her face paled. "So, what now? Am I supposed to hide forever?" He shook his head, his voice firm. "No, we're not hiding. We're fighting back." Lily looked at him skeptically. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? You said yourself that they're powerful." Ethan's eyes darkened with determination. "I have something they want, control over certain assets. I've been keeping that as leverage. If they want it, they'll have to meet my terms." Lily couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're willing to negotiate with them? After everything they've done?" "It's not just about negotiation," Ethan clarified. "It's about taking back control. They think they can use you to manipulate me, but they're wrong." Lily's anger flared. "You're talking about playing a dangerous game, Ethan. You're gambling with my life." Ethan's face softened, and he reached out to her, his hand gentle on her arm. "I know it's dangerous, Lily, but I won't let them hurt you." "Not again." She pulled away, her voice a mixture of frustration and fear. "I don't know if I can trust you, Ethan. I don't even know if I should be here." He looked down, his expression pained. "I don't blame you for feeling that way, but I need you to understand that I'm doing this for you, for us." "Us?" Lily echoed, her voice laced with bitterness. "There is no us, Ethan. There's only the mess you left behind." Ethan's shoulders slumped slightly, but he didn't look away. "I know I can't change the past, but I'm asking for a chance to change the future." Before Lily could respond, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression shifting from frustration to alarm. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tense. "It's from one of my sources," he replied. "They want to meet. It's urgent." Lily crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "And you're just going to leave me here?" Ethan paused, clearly torn. "I don't want to, but this could be the breakthrough we need. I'll have a guard stationed outside, just in case." Lily's frustration reached a boiling point. "You can't just expect me to sit here while you go off to play hero, Ethan. This isn't a game." "I know it's not," he said quietly, "but I need you to be safe." "Please, Lily." She clenched her jaw, then finally nodded, though every fiber of her being was screaming to run. "Fine, go. But don't expect me to be here when you get back." Ethan's eyes flashed with a mix of determination and sadness. "I won't be gone long. Just stay strong, Lily." With that, he turned and left, leaving her alone once again. The apartment felt colder now, emptier. Lily tried to distract herself with music, but the notes felt hollow, devoid of the passion that had once fueled them. Everything seemed tainted by the fear and uncertainty that had taken over her life. An hour passed, then another. The silence was suffocating, and Lily's mind raced with doubts and fears. She paced the room, feeling trapped and vulnerable. Then, a sudden noise at the door startled her. She froze, her breath hitching. There was a key turning in the lock. The door creaked open, but it wasn't Ethan. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, his expression calm and calculated. "Miss Ward," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false politeness. "I'm afraid we need to have a conversation." Lily's blood ran cold. She backed away slowly, her eyes darting around the room for an escape route. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you're going to do." Panic surged through Lily, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Ethan will be back any minute." The man's smile widened. "I'm counting on it." As he took a step closer, Lily felt a surge of adrenaline. The realization hit her like a punch. She was no longer just a pawn in Ethan's world. She was a target, and this was only the beginning of a battle she wasn't sure she could win. Lily's heart pounded as she faced the stranger in Ethan's apartment. Every instinct told her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The man, with his cold, calculating stare, took another step forward, closing the distance between them. He seemed calm, too calm, and that frightened her more than anything. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the sofa behind her. Lily hesitated, her mind racing for a plan. She couldn't show fear. Drawing in a shaky breath, she sat down slowly, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. Her fingers trembled, but she clasped them tightly in her lap to keep the man from noticing. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice wavering despite her best efforts to sound strong. He smirked, his eyes never leaving hers. "You could say I'm an old associate of Ethan's family. But it's not me you need to worry about, Miss Ward. It's what happens next." Lily swallowed hard, refusing to look away. "What do you want from me?" The man leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It's simple. You're going to convince Ethan to give up his assets, everything he's holding on to. You're the leverage we need. Why should I help you?" Lily retorted, her voice gaining a bit more strength. "If you think threatening me will work, you're wrong." He smiled again, but this time it was darker, more menacing. "You misunderstand. This isn't a negotiation, Miss Ward. Ethan's defiance is costing us time and money, and now you're the cost he'll have to pay." Fear coiled tightly in her chest, but Lily forced herself to remain composed. "If you think I can convince him to give in, you don't know Ethan very well." The man's expression remained unchanged. "We're aware of that, but he cares for you, and that makes you valuable, whether you want it or not." Lily's mind raced. Ethan had told her about his family's ruthlessness, but hearing it laid out so plainly was terrifying. She had become a pawn, and she couldn't allow that to happen. She needed to stall, buy time until Ethan returned. "What if I refuse?" she asked, her voice low but firm. The man's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "Then you'll see just how far we're willing to go. And I assure you, it's further than you think." Lily felt a chill run through her, but she knew she couldn't let him see her fear. "Ethan won't let you get away with this," she said, hoping it sounded more like a warning than a plea. The man stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "Perhaps. But he's not here, is he?" Before Lily could respond, the man's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing slightly. "Looks like we'll have to cut this short," he said, his tone suddenly urgent. "But don't think this is over, Miss Ward." He turned to leave, but paused at the door, throwing one last glance over his shoulder. "Remember what I said? You have more influence over Ethan than you realize. Use it wisely." And with that, he was gone. Lily sat motionless for a moment, her body numb with shock. The reality of what had just happened hit her like a wave, leaving her breathless. She had been threatened, manipulated, and reduced to a bargaining chip in a matter of minutes. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and she struggled to steady her breathing. Moments later, the door burst open again, but this time it was Ethan. His face was etched with panic, his eyes wild as he scanned the room. "Lily!" he called out, rushing to her side. She stood up, her legs unsteady. "He was here," she managed to say. "He said they want you to give up everything, or else." Ethan's expression darkened, rage simmering just beneath the surface. "I knew they'd try something like this. I shouldn't have left you alone." Lily shook her head, still processing everything. "What are you going to do, Ethan? You can't keep me safe forever." He took her hands, his grip firm yet gentle. "I won't let them hurt you, but you need to trust me. I have a plan." Lily pulled away, her frustration boiling over. "Trust you? You dragged me into this without warning. How am I supposed to trust you when you've kept me in the dark?" Ethan's face fell, guilt and desperation mingling in his eyes. "You're right. I've made mistakes. But I need you to believe that I'm doing this for us, for your safety." She wanted to believe him. Despite everything, there was still a part of her that longed to trust him, to let herself hope for something more. But the stakes were too high now, the danger too real. "What's the plan, Ethan?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of anger and vulnerability. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then spoke quickly. "I have information that could destroy them. It's risky, but if I can expose what they've done, they'll lose their power." Lily stared at him, stunned. "And you think that will stop them? You think they'll just let you walk away after that?" "No," Ethan admitted, his voice heavy with resignation. "But it's the only way to end this. For good." A heavy silence settled between them. The plan was dangerous, reckless even, but it was the first glimpse of hope Lily had seen since Ethan's return. It was a chance to finally put an end to the nightmare that had started so many years ago. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that lingered. Ethan's eyes softened, a mixture of relief and admiration in his gaze. "I need you to stay strong, Lily. This won't be easy, and it won't be quick. But I promise you, I'll make it right." She nodded slowly, a sense of resolve settling over her. The path ahead was filled with uncertainty and danger, but one thing was clear. She couldn't back down now. Not when everything was on the line. As the night wore on, Lily felt a strange mix of fear and determination. Ethan's plan was a gamble, one that could either save them or destroy them completely. But at least it was a fight. And for the first time in years, she felt a spark of the old fire that had once driven her. Before the betrayal, before the pain. There was no turning back now. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation and tension. Ethan's plan was set in motion with a mix of determination and desperation. They were about to confront forces that had controlled lives and crushed dreams for decades. It was a dangerous game, one filled with high stakes and no guarantees. Lily was tired of feeling helpless. Despite her fear, she found strength in the urgency of the situation. Ethan's family had drawn a line, and she was no longer willing to be the victim. She practiced her music during the day to keep herself calm, but her nights were restless, filled with anxious thoughts and the constant presence of Ethan nearby. Ethan had secured a small, discreet team to assist him, a few trustworthy allies he had made during his years of navigating his family's treacherous world. They worked quietly, gathering evidence, verifying documents, and preparing to strike. The plan was straightforward but risky. They would leak incriminating information about the Martin family's illegal dealings to a powerful journalist who had the influence to spark an investigation. But the key to the plan's success was a face-to-face meeting Ethan had arranged with the family's lawyer, a man deeply entangled in the Martin web. Ethan needed to make him believe that he was willing to bargain, using the very assets he had held back for years. "Are you sure about this?" Lily asked Ethan one evening as they reviewed the final details. Ethan's face was hard, but his eyes were filled with a mix of hope and determination. "I have to be. It's the only way to break their hold." Lily nodded, feeling both admiration and fear for the man before her. This was the Ethan she remembered, the one who had been willing to take risks, to dream of a better world. But now, he was doing it not just for himself, but for her, for them. The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon at a private club in Midtown, one frequented by the wealthy and powerful. Ethan insisted that Lily stay behind, but she refused. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said firmly. "I need to see this through with you." Ethan reluctantly agreed, though his worry was evident. "Stay close to me," he warned as they approached the grand entrance of the club. "And if anything goes wrong, you leave immediately." Lily gave a curt nod, her face set with resolve. "I can handle myself." Inside, the atmosphere was one of opulence and secrecy, with whispers and discreet glances exchanged over crystal glasses of expensive liquor. Ethan led Lily to a private room, where a middle-aged man sat waiting, his sharp eyes and expensive suit a testament to the world he inhabited. "Ethan," the man said with a cold smile, standing to shake his hand. "I wasn't sure you'd actually show up." Ethan's smile was equally cold. "I have no intention of playing games, Mr. Clark. You know why I'm here." Clark's eyes shifted to Lily for a brief moment, sizing her up. "Ah, the famous Miss Ward," he remarked casually. "You've caused quite a stir." Lily kept her expression neutral, refusing to be intimidated. "I didn't intend to, but your family forced my hand." Clark chuckled. "It seems Ethan's found a worthy partner." The negotiations began, a tense back and forth of veiled threats and forced civility. Ethan laid out his terms, offering partial control of his assets in exchange for a guarantee of Lily's safety and an end to the harassment. Clark remained stoic, his expression giving away nothing. "We have enough evidence to bring down your entire operation," Ethan warned. "Either you agree to our terms, or it all goes public." Clark leaned back in his chair, appearing unfazed. "You're playing a dangerous game, Ethan, but you've always had a reckless streak, haven't you?" Lily couldn't tell whether Clark was bluffing or truly unfazed, but Ethan's confidence seemed unshaken. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken threats. But then, Clark's phone rang, interrupting the stalemate. He answered briefly, his face changing as he listened to the voice on the other end. When he hung up, his demeanor had shifted, a flicker of uncertainty flashing across his eyes. "It seems you weren't bluffing," Clark said finally, a touch of resignation in his voice. "The leaks have started." Ethan's expression remained calm, but Lily could see the relief in his eyes. "You still have a chance to end this cleanly," he said quietly. "Accept the deal and it stops here." Clark studied Ethan for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, but know this. Your family won't forgive you for this betrayal." Ethan's eyes hardened. "I'm not looking for forgiveness, just freedom." With the deal struck, Clark left the room, his steps brisk and angry. Ethan and Lily sat in silence for a moment, both stunned by the sudden victory. "Did we really do it?" Lily asked softly, still trying to process what had just happened. Ethan turned to her, a genuine smile breaking across his face for the first time in what felt like years. "Yes, Lily, we did it." The sense of relief was overwhelming. Lily felt tears welling up, a mixture of joy, exhaustion, and disbelief. She had spent so long fighting shadows, haunted by the pain of Ethan's disappearance and the weight of unanswered questions. Now, finally, there was a sense of closure, a beginning, not just an end. Back at Ethan's apartment later that night, the atmosphere was different. It was lighter, filled with a sense of victory, however fragile. They sat on the balcony, looking out at the twinkling city lights below. "You did it, Ethan," Lily said. her voice filled with admiration. "You really broke free." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and love. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lily. You gave me a reason to fight." She smiled, her heart full of emotions she hadn't felt in years. "And what happens now?" Ethan took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Now we start over. No more secrets, no more running." Lily felt a surge of hope, a feeling she had almost forgotten. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still scars, still wounds that needed time to heal. But it was real, and it was theirs. As the city below continued its restless hum, Lily leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, finding comfort in his presence. For the first time in years, the future didn't seem so uncertain. There would be challenges ahead, but they would face them together. The past had been painful, but it had led them back to each other. And this time, they weren't letting go. Months had passed since Ethan had finally dismantled the power that had held him captive for so long. The once imposing influence of the Martin family had been reduced to a shell of its former self, caught in the web of legal battles, media scrutiny, and public scandal. The investigations that followed the leaks were relentless, exposing decades of corruption and deceit. The Martins had no choice but to retreat, focusing all their efforts on damage control. For the first time in years, Ethan felt a real sense of freedom, an unfamiliar but welcome feeling. Lily had found her own sense of peace. After years of doubt and heartbreak, she had finally come to terms with the scars Ethan's disappearance had left. The wounds hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they were reminders of how far she'd come. Her music had also evolved, no longer burdened by unresolved pain. Her melodies now carried a richer, more profound emotion. It was early autumn, and Central Park was ablaze with vibrant hues of red, orange, and gold. A gentle breeze carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves as Lily prepared for a special performance. It wasn't in a grand ballroom or at a prestigious event, but on a small stage in one of the park's open spaces, where anyone could stop and listen. This simplicity made it all the more meaningful, a return to the kind of performance that had always given her joy. The crowd gathered slowly, drawn by the warm, inviting sounds of musicians tuning their instruments. Families with children, tourists exploring the city, and New Yorkers on their morning walks stopped to listen. Ethan stood off to the side, watching Lily with an intense gaze that was no longer filled with regret or guilt, but with pride and love. He had learned to appreciate these small moments, ones that were free from the suffocating expectations of wealth and power. As the event began, Lily took center stage, her violin resting lightly on her shoulder. She scanned the crowd briefly, catching sight of Ethan, whose eyes never left her. It was a silent exchange, one filled with understanding, with promises fulfilled and new beginnings accepted. She started playing. The first notes were familiar, yet different. It was their song, the one Ethan had once taught her under the summer sun so many years ago. But this time, there was a new energy in her performance. The notes carried not just the weight of the past, but also the lightness of hope. Each stroke of the bow was filled with resilience, telling a story of love lost and found again. The crowd listened in rapt silence, caught up in the beauty of the music. Some closed their eyes, swaying gently, while others smiled, sharing a moment of peace in the middle of the bustling city. Ethan's heart swelled with every note, the music stirring memories that no longer felt painful but rather necessary, like stepping stones that had led them back to each other. When Lily finished, the applause was warm and genuine. She took a deep bow, her face glowing with a happiness Ethan hadn't seen in years. As she stepped down from the stage, Ethan made his way toward her, his smile wide and full of pride. "You were amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," Lily replied. Her cheeks flushed from both the performance and the chilly autumn air. "It felt different this time." "Felt right?" Ethan nodded, his eyes soft as he gazed at her. "That's because it is right, Lily. We've been through hell, but we made it back." Lily paused, her gaze steady but filled with emotion. "Do you ever think about what could have been? If things had gone differently all those years ago?" Ethan's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of quiet reflection. "I do. But then I realized that everything we went through brought us to this moment. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fair, but it made us who we are. And I think maybe it was worth it." Lily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but this time, they were tears of relief and release, not of pain. "I think you're right," she said softly. Ethan reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch tender. "So, what now? Where do we go from here?" Lily smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "We go forward, Ethan. We let the past be the past, and we start fresh." His expression was serious but hopeful. "Together?" "Together," she confirmed, taking his hand in hers. They walked through the park hand in hand, the leaves crunching beneath their feet, the city around them humming with life. It was a simple moment, but it was filled with meaning. There were still uncertainties, still shadows of the past that lingered in the background, but they felt less threatening now. What mattered was that they had chosen to face whatever came next side by side, no longer bound by fear or regret. As they reached a small bench by the lake, Ethan pulled Lily close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I love you, Lily," he said quietly, the words filled with sincerity. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I love you too, Ethan." It wasn't the end of the story, far from it. But for the first time, they had the freedom to write the next chapter on their own terms, without the ghosts of the past haunting their every step. And as they sat there, watching the sun begin to set over the city, they both knew that the best part of their journey was just beginning.